Hi, automotive enthusiasts. Welcome to Boost Bureau, where we explore machines, culture, and the stories that move us. Today, we're diving into a car that many Americans have never heard of, yet it carries the weight of an entire brand's ambition, the Mazda Sentia 3.0 V6, built between 1991 and 1995. This luxury sedan was Mazda's bold play to rival the rising stars from Lexus, Infiniti, and Acura. But unlike its competitors, it never officially crossed U.S. shores. That absence, however, is exactly what makes it fascinating now. Because decades later, as import windows open and enthusiasts scour for rare metal that tells a story beyond horsepower figures, the Sentia suddenly emerges as a compelling alternative in the overlooked corners of Japanese automotive history. What makes the Sentia so intriguing isn't just its obscurity. Mazda poured resources into creating a car that represented more than transportation. It represented the company's dream of ascending into the premium stratosphere. With futuristic styling, unusual proportions, and technology like four-wheel steering, the Sentia was both experimental and sophisticated. Yet it landed in a marketplace dominated by Toyota's Lexus LS and Nissan's Infiniti Q45. And while those cars found homes in the United States, the Sentia was left standing outside, watching its rivals gather accolades. That dynamic, the brilliant attempt overshadowed by louder competitors, creates a storyline worth unpacking. Over the next stretch, we'll trace the Sentia's journey from its conception during Japan's bubble economy, through its real-world presence in domestic and export markets, to its rediscovery today by U.S. enthusiasts hungry for something different. We'll examine why Mazda thought it could challenge the big players, how cultural and economic forces shaped the car's development, and why its legacy is far more interesting than its sales numbers suggest. Along the way, we'll meet the key ideas that shaped its design, the hidden influences of Japanese executive culture, and the lessons of timing in a fast-changing global auto market. You'll hear how a sedan most people forgot is now quietly being imported, not as a mainstream collectible, but as a left-field pick for enthusiasts who prize originality over resale charts. By the end of this video, you'll not only know what the Mazda Sentia was, but you'll understand why it matters, why it reveals truths about ambition, missteps, and the passage of time in the car world. So buckle in. We're about to unearth the full story of a luxury sedan that dared to aim higher, only to find itself remembered decades later for exactly that ambition. Micro story. In the late 1980s, Mazda was not the scrappy underdog many American drivers imagined. Flush with cash from Japan's booming economy and growing sales worldwide, the company looked across the Pacific and saw Toyota spinning gold, with Lexus, Nissan building prestige with Infiniti, and Honda stretching into Acura. Mazda executives didn't want to remain the brand of small sporty coupes and practical hatchbacks. They wanted a flagship sedan that would plant them firmly in the conversation of luxury. Out of that ambition came the blueprint for the Sentia, a car meant to embody quiet power and refined status while still carrying the spark of innovation that Mazda had built its reputation on. Micro story. The design process for the Sentia broke convention even in Japan. Instead of sticking to safe lines and predictable profiles, Mazda designers sculpted a sedan with a low beltline, wide stance, and long flowing curves that almost looked like an American concept car shrunk for Japanese roads. The effect was striking. It was elegant but a little daring, as if it wanted to be noticed without being ostentatious. The visual message was clear. This was not just a bigger Mazda, it was Mazda attempting to rewrite what premium meant on its own terms. Yet behind that bold look lay a tension. Could Mazda convince conservative buyers to embrace something so unconventional? Micro story. To make sure the Sentia was not dismissed as just another pretty shell, Mazda loaded it with advanced technology. Most striking was the four-wheel steering system, designed to improve both low-speed maneuverability and high-speed stability. It was the kind of tech that made engineers proud and gave the Sentia talking points to match rivals boasting V8s and leather-lined cabins. The car also carried a smooth 3.0-liter V6, aiming for refinement rather than brute force. Mazda wanted to prove that sophistication came from smart engineering, not sheer size or displacement. The challenge was convincing status-conscious buyers, especially those influenced by Western luxury norms, that this new formula was worth their attention. Micro-story. For Japanese executives, cars were not just tools, but symbols. The bubble-era corporate world was full of cues about prestige, and being seen in the right car mattered as much as the office you worked in. In this climate, Toyota's Lexus LS400 and Nissan's Infiniti Q45 offered a kind of certainty. They looked and felt the part of luxury machines tailored to impress both at home and abroad. The Sentia, however, stood apart. Its design was less formal, its engine smaller, and its branding lacked the carefully cultivated aura of Lexus or Infiniti. In chasing originality, Mazda risked being perceived as eccentric rather than aspirational. That cultural nuance shaped how the Sentia was received and why it struggled to gain traction even in its home market. Context digest. By 1991, the Japanese economy was showing cracks. The financial bubble that had inflated land prices, corporate expansions, and consumer confidence began to falter. For automakers, this was terrible timing. The Sentia launched into a market suddenly wary of extravagance, just as rivals had already staked their ground with cars that felt more reassuring. Mazda had created a bold flagship, but it was stepping onto a shrinking stage. Context digest. The US market, meanwhile, was falling in love with Japanese luxury, but only through officially supported channels. Lexus, Infiniti, and Acura all had dedicated showrooms, dealer networks, and marketing budgets to reassure buyers who were hesitant about foreign prestige. Mazda, lacking a luxury sub-brand in America, left the Sentia at home. Instead, it tried a different experiment, the Amati brand, which was planned but never fully launched. The Sentia was meant to be one of its crown jewels, but when Amati collapsed, before reaching American soil, the Sentia's chance at U.S. relevance evaporated. Reflection bridge. Ambition collided with timing, and what could have been Mazda's luxury breakout became an orphaned vision. Context digest. Even without a U.S. presence, the Sentia had a modest life in other export markets. Some units went to Australia, parts of Asia, and Europe, but volumes were tiny. Without the marketing muscle of a global rollout, it became a car known mostly to Mazda loyalists or curious importers. This obscurity planted the seeds for its future. Rarity, because few people outside Japan even knew it existed, let alone considered it as a collectible. Micro-story. Owners who did take a chance on the Sentia often praised its smooth ride and futuristic flair, but the car's quirks stood out too. The cabin layout was unusual, with wide expanses of dashboard and angles that felt more spaceship than sedan. For buyers expecting stately formality, the Sentia could feel like a misfit. Yet those who appreciated Mazda's quirkiness found themselves enjoying a car that didn't quite play by the rules. This duality, between being too odd for the mainstream, yet too refined to dismiss, helped shape its identity as a cult favorite. Micro-story. Within Mazda, the Sentia's struggles carried lessons. The failure of Amati and the lukewarm reception of the Sentia reminded the company that chasing prestige required more than innovation. It required the patience and resources to build an entire ecosystem of trust. Engineers had delivered a technically impressive sedan, but without branding, marketing, and a global stage, it never had a chance to fulfill its mission. These internal realizations would influence Mazda's strategy in the decades that followed, focusing on doing more with less and leaning into niches rather than battling giants head-on. Reflection bridge. Yet even as the Sentia faded from the showroom floor, it quietly built the foundations for a second life it could never have predicted. Micro-story. Decades later, the Sentia began reappearing in conversations among enthusiasts. With the 25-year import rule opening doors, Americans looking for something different than the usual Skyline or Supra started to notice the forgotten luxury Mazda. Suddenly, a car once ignored for being too unconventional became desirable for the same reason. Collectors valued its rarity, while drivers discovered it offered comfort, style, and quirk at prices far below established Japanese luxury icons. That reversal of fortune, born from obscurity, gave the Sentia a surprising second act. And with that twist in its journey, we're ready to see how its story continued to evolve on a broader stage. Micro story. As the 1990s wore on, the Sentia remained in Mazda showrooms, but it never broke through to the mainstream. Still, it wasn't forgotten. In Japan, the car gained a reputation as a president's sedan, something a mid-level executive might use to signal success without spending Toyota Crown or Nissan Sima money. For those buyers, the Sentia offered comfort and technology at a discount, but it also carried the unspoken recognition that they had chosen the road less traveled. That subtle distinction created a unique social position, respectable but unconventional, refined yet unorthodox. Micro story. Meanwhile, in export markets where the Sentia did appear, reactions varied. In Australia, it was seen as a stylish but puzzling choice compared to European sedans. In certain parts of Asia, it appealed to governments and businesses looking for a premium car without paying European prices. But in every market, the Sentia lived in the shadows, never a bestseller, always the alternative pick. This global scattering meant that decades later, enthusiasts would stumble upon these cars like buried treasure, amazed that Mazda had once produced such a flagship. Context digest. By the mid-1990s, Japan's economy had slowed dramatically. The bubble burst had shifted consumer tastes, making extravagance seem out of touch. Even Toyota and Nissan scaled back their most ambitious projects, while Honda's Acura division struggled to define itself. Against this backdrop, the Sentia's daring design and emphasis on tech seemed increasingly mismatched with the cautious mood of the times. Sales dwindled, and the model quietly faded from relevance. Micro story. But endings in the car world are rarely permanent. Fast forward to the 2000s and 2010s, when the import scene in the United States was maturing. Once enthusiasts had brought over Skyline GTRs, Supras, and Evo rally legends, they began to look deeper. Forums, meetups, and YouTube channels highlighted forgotten Japanese luxury sedans that could be imported for a fraction of the price of more famous icons. The Sentia, with its futuristic lines and obscurity, became an unexpected candidate for this wave of rediscovery. Micro story. A surprising number of these imports were rescued from obscurity by enthusiasts who valued uniqueness over speed. Some restored them carefully, treating the Sentia as a museum piece of Mazda's ambitions. Others modified them, fitting air suspension, larger wheels, and modern sound systems to transform the car into a rolling statement of individuality. In either case, the Sentia turned from a forgotten footnote into a canvas for personal expression, a role it was almost destined to play given its unconventional origins. Reflection bridge. The very traits that doomed the Sentia in its launch years had become its selling points decades later. Context digest. Online marketplaces and auction platforms only accelerated this transformation. In Japan, low-mileage Sentias often appeared at modest prices, and U.S. buyers willing to deal with import logistics found themselves owning a conversation piece for less than the cost of a used Camry. Unlike Skylines or Supras, which had been hyped into the stratosphere, the Sentia lived in the sweet spot of accessibility and intrigue. That price-to-rarity ratio made it attractive to a new generation of enthusiasts hunting for originality. Micro story. Cultural cachet also played a role. In American car culture, showing up with something rare and unusual often carries more impact than driving a known icon. A Sentia at Cars and Coffee might not turn heads at first, but once people realized what it was, curiosity bloomed. Owners became storytellers, explaining how Mazda had once tried to crack the luxury code. The car itself became a prop for history lessons, a bridge between Japan's bubble-era ambition and today's global enthusiast scene. Micro story. At the same time, practicality helped. Unlike some imports that require endless tinkering, the Sentia shared parts with other Mazda models, making maintenance less daunting. Its V6 engine was smooth and reliable, and while the electronics could be quirky, they weren't as intimidating as some European luxury cars of the era. For American buyers curious about dipping into JDM imports without the headache, the Sentia, offered a balanced entry point, rare enough to be special, simple enough to be livable. Reflection Bridge. Slowly but surely, what had once been an obscure curiosity became a legitimate, if still niche, player in the US import scene. Microstory. By the 2020s, stories of Sentia ownership began circulating in magazines, blogs, and channels like this one. Writers marveled at its unusual proportions, enthusiasts documented the thrill of finding one at auction, and collectors noted that its values, while still modest, were creeping upward. It wasn't about investment returns, it was about connection, the sense of being part of an overlooked chapter in Mazda's history. And with every new story, the Sentia's cultural footprint expanded, showing how a car once dismissed as a failed luxury experiment could reinvent itself as a cult classic. Context Digest. The Sentia's journey mirrored Mazda's broader story. The brand itself never became a global luxury powerhouse, but it survived by focusing on character, design, and driving enjoyment. Cars like the MX-5 Miata embodied this philosophy in sports cars, while the Sentia, retroactively, came to represent the luxury side of that same ethos. What had seemed like an out-of-step experiment now looked like a bold chapter in a brand's pursuit of identity, micro-story, and that identity continues to resonate today. For American enthusiasts exploring the vast catalog of Japanese cars eligible for import, the Sentia offers more than metal and leather. It offers narrative weight. Owning one is not just about having a car, it's about being part of the story, of Mazda reaching for the stars, missing and still leaving behind something beautiful. With that sense of rediscovery, the Sentia's tale moves us toward its ultimate lesson: how ambition, even when it falls short, can shape legacies in unexpected ways. Microstory. By the time enthusiasts began importing Sentias in greater numbers, Mazda itself had long moved on. The company had shifted away from chasing luxury and doubled down on a different philosophy, building cars with character and driving joy, even if they weren't the most powerful on paper. This pivot gave us generations of MX-5 Miatas, rotary sports cars that remain legends, and crossovers that still carried an edge of design daring. Yet in this evolution, the Sentia remained like a ghost, whispering about a time when Mazda aimed higher than anyone expected. Enthusiasts who discovered the Sentia weren't just finding a car, they were uncovering the moment when Mazda nearly transformed into something else entirely. Microstory. What makes the Sentia so compelling today is not that it was a runaway success, but that it wasn't. People love underdogs, and in the US car community, showing up with an underdog that tells a global story carries a certain badge of honor. At a cars and coffee gathering, a Skyline will draw a crowd, but a Sentia sparks longer conversations. People want to know what it is, why it exists, and how it ended up in America. In those exchanges, the owner becomes part of the larger narrative, bringing forgotten history back to life one question at a time. Context Digest. The broader collector market plays an important role here. As mainstream Japanese icons become prohibitively expensive, enthusiasts with smaller budgets turn to alternatives. Cars like the Mitsubishi Debonair, Nissan Cedric, or Toyota Crown find their way into American garages, but the Sentia stands out because it blends rarity with accessibility. Few cars deliver that mix of futuristic design, understated elegance, and sheer obscurity at such approachable prices. It fits into a sweet spot where curiosity outweighs cost, making it one of the most interesting entry points into Japanese luxury imports. Microstory. The Sentia also resonates because of how it looks on American roads today. Against a sea of modern crossovers and SUVs, its long, low proportions and sweeping curves feel cinematic. Even if someone has no idea about Mazda's history or Japan's bubble economy, the Sentia simply looks different. That aesthetic presence makes it photogenic, shareable on social media, and visually arresting in ways few cars of its era manage. Its survival into the digital age has given it a second chance at visibility, this time amplified by the reach of enthusiast communities online. Microstory. For owners, the emotional connection deepens with every mile. The Sentia doesn't just drive like an ordinary sedan. It carries a sense of occasion. The wide dash, the unusual steering system, the way the suspension smooths over bumps, all of it feels deliberate, as if Mazda wanted every ride to reinforce the notion of luxury, even if buyers didn't flock to it. In an era when so many cars feel interchangeable, that intentionality stands out. Owners speak of feeling like custodians rather than mere drivers, preserving a moment in time that might otherwise have slipped into oblivion. Reflection bridge. From forgotten showrooms to cherished garages, the Sentia's path proves how perception can transform across decades. Context digest. Looking at the bigger picture, the Sentia also raises questions about what defines success in the car world. Is it sales numbers, or is it the ability to leave behind something distinctive? If the metric is influence, then perhaps the Sentia succeeded quietly. It forced Mazda to rethink its direction. It provided lessons. That shaped future products. And it left a mark on those who experienced it firsthand. Success may not have come in the form of global acclaim, but in the long arc of automotive history, the Sentia's existence ensures Mazda's ambitions are remembered. Microstory. Today, when a Sentia appears at auction in the US, it rarely sells for headline-grabbing figures, but it always generates buzz. Enthusiasts trade links, discuss the design, and debate whether it's worth the import effort. That cycle of discussion gives the car a kind of immortality. Whether or not it enters someone's garage, it remains alive in conversation. For many enthusiasts, that dialogue is as valuable as the ownership itself, because it keeps the legacy of Mazda's luxury gamble in circulation. Microstory. And perhaps most importantly, the Sentia represents choice. In a market often dominated by the same handful of collector favorites, it stands as proof that there are always alternatives, always deeper stories to explore. For US enthusiasts who want something that no neighbor has, the Sentia offers not just rarity, but also meaning. It's a car that asks you to value narrative and individuality over badges and resale charts. That proposition may not be for everyone, but for those who accept it, the reward is a uniquely satisfying ownership experience. Reflection bridge. In rediscovering the Sentia, enthusiasts are not just preserving a car, they're preserving the ambition of an era, the echoes of a brand's reach, and the reminder that even failures can age into icons. Microstory. As we step back and consider everything, the Sentia's story serves as both caution and inspiration. It warns brands about the perils of overreaching without infrastructure, yet it also celebrates the daring needed to aim higher than expected. For US enthusiasts, it provides a tangible connection to that tension, one they can park in their driveway and share with anyone curious enough to ask. In this way, the Sentia lives on not as a relic, but as a companion in the ongoing dialogue between ambition and reality in the car world. With that realization, we reach the heart of its legacy, a reminder that history is not just written by winners, but by dreamers bold enough to try. For those of you who have stayed with us through this journey, thank you, because the story of the Mazda Sentia 3.0 V6 is not just about a single sedan, it's about how ambition, timing, and culture shape the machines we remember. We began with a car born in the heady days of Japan's bubble economy, carrying the weight of Mazda's dream to climb into the luxury stratosphere. We followed it through its struggles, overshadowed by rivals, misplaced in its era, and denied the US stage it was meant to grace. And we traced how, decades later, obscurity transformed into allure, as American enthusiasts rediscovered the Sentia as a rare artifact of design daring and forgotten ambition. What we take away from its story is bigger than the Sentia itself. It's the lesson that not every car's value lies in sales figures or brand recognition. Sometimes the most rewarding machines are the ones that dared to be different, that stood apart even when it cost them success. For the US community, the Sentia represents possibility. The possibility of importing something rare, of connecting to a global story, of owning a machine that carries with it the echoes of an era when anything felt achievable. Looking at the Sentia today, you see more than sheet metal. You see Mazda's willingness to experiment, to challenge convention, and to risk failure in the pursuit of prestige. That spirit is worth celebrating because it reminds us that innovation doesn't always win in the marketplace, but it always leaves a mark. Enthusiasts who preserve these cars are doing more than collecting. They're keeping alive the memory of bold ideas, of dreams that mattered even when they didn't work out. So as we close, remember that every time you see an obscure import, at a meet or stumble across an unfamiliar name in an auction listing, there might be a story just as rich as the Sentias waiting to be told. These hidden gems invite us to look beyond the obvious, to appreciate the full spectrum of automotive history. And that, at its heart, is what Overdrive Insider is about. Uncovering the machines and moments that move us, not just the ones on magazine covers. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the Mazda Sentia. Until next time, drive curious, stay passionate, and keep exploring the stories that make our car culture extraordinary. Farewell, automotive enthusiasts. We'll see you on the next journey.